Hi, it's Brass Check, and I'm recording this on February 1st, 2021. And this is the first anniversary of the first thing that I published about the COVID con. It was just a short little tweet on February 1st, 2020. And I basically said that I don't get it. Wuhan is the most air polluted city in the world by far. Why are we so concerned about a winter respiratory disease there? Of course, there's going to be all kinds of respiratory problems. And I really haven't changed my opinion on that. If we look at the places that had, quote, outbreaks of COVID, they included Wuhan, which again, Wuhan is so polluted that the pollution from Wuhan affects other countries. I mean, it's not just a bad day in Wuhan, it's a bad day 500, 600, 800, 1,000 miles away. It is one of the most toxic places on the planet, has been for a long time. And if we look at the other places that had outbreaks, they include Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, and nobody told you that it has one of the worst air pollution problems in the world as well. They have all kinds of cars. Gasoline is pretty cheap. They have that kind of big bowl that LA has with the bright sunshine. Not good with, and they don't have catalytic converters. So it is a really, really seriously air polluted place. Another place that has a serious air pollution problem, the worst air pollution in all of Europe, is, drumroll please, northern Italy. That's where the Italian outbreak centered. Northern Italy is famous for two things. One, a really old population. I believe it's the oldest population in all of Europe. And number two, it is the most polluted place in all of Europe. It's people generally think of Italy as, Chianti and, all that kind of stuff. But it's actually, the north is heavily industrialized and very, very polluted. Where else was there a big outbreak? Well, we also had a big outbreak in New York City, particularly in a borough called the Bronx. The Bronx has the Cross Bronx Expressway, which is one of America's interstate highways that runs through the Bronx in an elevated way. Unbelievable amounts of traffic. Could be the most busy interstate in America. Not sure about that, but certainly in the top 10, maybe easily in the top 5, could be number 1. And this thing is always in a traffic jam. And so what you have are diesel trucks sitting in a traffic jam with their engines running, raining diesel fumes down on the population. It has the highest rate of childhood asthma in the country, and it has some of the worst hospitals in the country. They're city run. So that's another very polluted place. You also had the sinister reality that we reported in great detail about the fact that the city-run hospitals seem to be set up to kill people, either by accident or on purpose. We did a whole thing on it. You've got to go to the website, find our videos on COVID, find our videos on, quote, the New York problem, and we went into that in more detail than any other source. Basically, people would come in with panic attacks, with asthma attacks, with basically anything, and in the city hospitals, they'd vent them right away. And the report from the nurse who was our source, who worked there, said the vents were always running. As soon as somebody died, they hosed them down and put somebody else on them. And if we remember, the federal government paid a huge bounty to anybody who would put somebody on a vent. First call, if you called somebody COVID, they'd give you one bounty, and then if you put them on a vent, they'd give you another. So when we look at the places that had the severe outbreaks, Wuhan, Tehran, northern Italy, and the city hospitals of New York, suddenly it's not a mystery that there were a lot of people with respiratory problems last winter. So that's something that you weren't told. and people forget. But we reported it exactly a year ago, February 1st, 2020. We said, why are people losing their minds over people having respiratory ailments in a city where all the men smoke? Um, and the air pollution, the air quality is really low. There's another thing that you're not being told, and nobody is discussing it. And I mean nobody, zero. And I don't know why. How many people do you think have died of COVID in all of China in 2020? You'd think, well, it must be hundreds, maybe millions, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, right? Try 4,000 plus total for the whole country. That's the number that China is reporting. And there's of course the propaganda meme, China's lying, China's lying, China's lying. Well, maybe they're not lying. And if they're not lying, then how do we justify? I don't know. I don't even look at the American numbers because the American numbers are a total fraud. You know, first it was 100,000, then it was 200,000, then it was 300,000. Is it 400,000 now? I don't know. I fully expect someday they're going to declare that 300 million people have died of COVID in the United States. So nobody, and I mean nobody, none of the Nobel Prize winning statisticians, uh, nobody is asking how on earth there could be that huge a gap. Remember, China has 4 times as many people as the United States. So if we've got, 400,000 dead and they only have 4,000 dead, we don't have 1,000 times, we don't have 100 times more deaths than they do. We have 4 times 100. So we have 400 times more deaths than China. That doesn't make any sense on any level. And I even had a colleague say, well, they did a much more effective lockdown. I mean, you got to work hard to be that stupid, okay? You can't have that huge a gap in lethality of a virus between countries. It just can't happen. And yet the numbers say that it did, and none of the scientists are asking anything about it. So that's our report on February 1st, 2021. Again, we are commemorating our first tweet on this, which in some ways was our best tweet because the thing was a fraud from day one. Respiratory People dying of respiratory illness in Wuhan in January, a city of 11 million, the most polluted city in the world, where every man smokes like a chimney, and they have a substandard healthcare system. Are we shocked that in the fall, in the winter, you have respiratory illnesses that kill people? Shouldn't be. But what these demons did was they took a reality and they framed it. And the frame said, this is a new disease never before seen by mankind, and it came from a bat that came, through the wet market, right? Well, it turns out that this variety of SARS, which is also a stupid name, it just means severe respiratory syndrome, right? So anyway, this variety of SARS is not that different from the original SARS-1. Apparently, by common observation, the vast majority of people that, quote, get the virus don't even know they have it or have such a mild case it's insignificant. So that's another lie. The lie that this thing was new was a total lie. The lie that this thing was deadly. Yes, if you are frail and elderly, or you have advanced cancer, or you have advanced diabetes, or you are being treated by a maliciously incompetent physician at a maliciously incompetent hospital, yeah, you might die of this. Okay, but if we look at the odds are even for the elderly, the odds are very, 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 very unlikely that you're going to die of this. The other thing that people aren't being told, or at least the public isn't being told, is there's a treatment for this in its early stages that works. There's a prophylactic, a preventative you can take to reduce your chances of getting it. Uh, Nobody needed to get this thing, um, and nobody needed to die of this thing. If in fact what they're saying about it is true, we'll assume that what they're saying is true, that there's a virus, and it's deadly. Well, if all that's true, why have they been working overtime to prevent you from knowing there are preventative things that you can do? In addition to the drugs one can take, one can also make sure that you're taking vitamin D. You should take it in the morning, and you should take it with fat, because it's fat soluble. Otherwise, you'll just wash through your system. So you take your D in the morning with fat. You make sure you're taking zinc, and that has proven to be extremely effective. And even Fauci the fraud mentioned that several months ago. Of course, the news media was totally disinterested in an inexpensive cure, which brings us to our news media. I think the big story, there's so many big stories, but the big story is how utterly corrupt and dishonest and unreliable the news media is. They have done nothing but promote terror and mayhem, and they have lied non-stop from the day this thing began. We are not. I do not operate a professional news bureau with dozens, scores, or hundreds of employees. NBC does, Bloomberg does, New York Times does, and somehow they have managed to get absolutely every story wrong. Everything. There's not one thing that they reported correctly and honestly in this entire thing. So, longtime Brass Check listeners know that the news media has been completely taken over by pharma, and that occurred long before COVID. And if you want to know the mechanism, it's simple. If you turn on the evening news, you're going to see at least half the ads are pharma ads. Right there. That's how they took over the news media. If half your income is consistently coming from one source that you can count on, and that source is paying you top dollar, you're going to dance to their tune, and that's exactly what they do. There's another thing which Brass Check is one of the few to reveal, which is that Bill Gates has been giving away tens of millions of dollars over the last 10 years or more. We only tracked it in the last 10, over $100 million to news outlets to, quote, support their health reporting. So the Los Angeles Times, which is a sadistic, dishonest news outlet, has gotten money from them. NPR, which has pushed this thing 24/7, has gotten money from them. Reuters, which is one of the primary news sources for the world, has gotten money from them. In France, Le Monde, which is the main newspaper. In Spain, El País, which is the main newspaper. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of news outlets has received millions and millions of dollars from Bill Gates. So they are completely unreliable, criminally unreliable. So anyway, that's the news. February 1st, 2021. None of this should have been a surprise to longtime Brass Check listeners. We know completely thoroughly aware of the corruption of the news media. We know our local politicians are mostly deviants who will do anything to get along and keep their noses in the trough, in the pig trough. And we know our doctors can't really be relied on, and they're showing their true colors. Yeah, there are some heroic doctors out there. They are less than 1%. The rest of them are just keeping their heads down and protecting their little money-making license, and they will let their patients die before they will risk their money-making license. You need to know that. We've been saying that before COVID. Everyone has to get educated about health. Thank God for the moment, at least, you can still get a lot of good information from the internet, though they are Google and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. are doing their best to censor and hide uh, real science and real health and real medical information, but it's still out there and you can still find it. And yeah, it's unfair that in addition to being sick, people also have to become medical researchers. But that's the world we live in. And we just have to do it. So that's Brass Check. Please share these videos. There's information here that literally you cannot get from any other source, and that includes the so-called progressive reporters. They have really terribly dropped the ball on this. And there's also a lot of people I think are doing great work, but they're dealing with esoteric statistics, and they're just confusing people. This thing started out as a common sense problem. It's been a common sense problem, and it remains a common sense problem. You do not shut the world down over a respiratory illness. You just don't do it. It's never been done before. The methods that they use that were supposed to be miraculous didn't work as we predicted they wouldn't. The masks are a fraud. The social distancing makes a little sense in a real epidemic. Hand washing makes sense, but all those gels that people are putting on their hands, that don't do anything. They kill bacteria. They have nothing to do with viruses. Have you been told to wash your hands with soap recently? No. Have you been bullied into wearing a mask? Now 2 masks. Now they're going for 3 and 4. Yeah, you're bullied on that 24/7. So it's clear they don't have any intention of helping people maintain their health. This is all about terrorism. This is all about destroying small business, which they've done a very good job of doing. This is all about inflicting great harm on the working poor. That's what this has all been about from day one. Anyway, I could go on and on, but we'll stop there. Brass Check. Please share this stuff because people are not getting it.